Linda Parker, the loyal first wife who gave 30 years of her life to her husband. Robert Parker, the successful man who traded decades of marriage for a younger bride. And Emily, the 28-year-old second wife, whose sudden entrance into their world set off a deadly chain of events. What began as a story of love, betrayal, and humiliation would spiral into obsession, rage, and ultimately murder. This is the chilling case of how a respected wife became a killer and how one family's secrets tore a community apart. Linda Parker believed she had everything she ever wanted. For 30 years, she stood beside her husband Robert, building a marriage that others admired from the outside. Their life appeared to be the picture of stability and love. They had raised 2 children together, poured their energy into a small business that eventually thrived, and created a home filled with decades of memories. Linda was known in her neighborhood as a loyal wife and devoted mother, someone who had dedicated her life to her family without hesitation. She felt safe in the role she had played for so long, never imagining that the foundation she depended on could crumble in an instant. To Linda, Robert was her partner, her anchor, and the man who had shared her joys and struggles since youth. Their marriage had not been without challenges, but she had always believed they had weathered storms better than most. Friends looked at them as an example of commitment, often remarking on how rare it was to see such a strong bond last for decades. When Robert smiled at her across the dinner table or kissed her goodbye before heading to work, she took it as a sign that the love they shared was still intact. The thought of betrayal never crossed her mind, because she trusted him completely. She had built her identity around the certainty of their relationship, giving up personal ambitions and dedicating herself fully to her role as his wife. But under the surface of that seemingly perfect life, small cracks had begun to form, cracks Linda refused to acknowledge. Robert was changing in ways she could not yet explain. The man who once seemed so devoted was slowly becoming a stranger. Robert's behavior began shifting in ways that unsettled Linda, though at first, she tried to dismiss them as harmless. He started coming home later than usual, offering vague explanations about business meetings that seemed to stretch into the night. He grew distant, avoiding the small conversations that once connected them during quiet evenings. His phone, once casually left on the counter, was now guarded closely, always locked and turned face down. Linda noticed the changes but clung to the hope that he was simply stressed, that their busy lives had created a temporary gap between them. Deep down, however, she felt the cold weight of suspicion pressing on her heart. The turning point came when curiosity overcame restraint. One evening, while Robert was in the shower, Linda picked up his phone and scrolled through his messages. What she discovered shook her world. Buried among mundane conversations were affectionate texts and secret plans, not meant for her, but for another woman named Emily. The words were filled with passion and excitement, expressions Robert had not shared with her in years. Emily was only 28, full of youth and energy, everything Linda felt she could no longer offer. The betrayal was crushing. Linda's hands trembled as she read each message, her stomach sinking with every line. The man she had trusted for decades had been living a double life, building a secret relationship while she remained in the dark. Her heart raced as the truth settled in. Robert had found someone else, and he had chosen to give his love to her instead. For Linda, it wasn't only about infidelity. It was the destruction of the life she had carefully built, the erasure of her role as wife, partner, and confidant. The shock of the affair was devastating enough, but what followed pushed Linda into a deeper spiral of humiliation. Robert did not end his relationship with Emily. Instead, he made a choice that would shatter Linda's dignity completely. Without telling his first wife, he traveled out of state and secretly married the younger woman. When the truth emerged, it spread like wildfire through the small community. Suddenly, Linda was no longer just a betrayed wife. She was the abandoned one, left behind while her husband paraded his new bride as if she were a prize. Emily was 28, youthful and radiant, and Robert seemed proud to show her off. He introduced her at business events, smiled at her in public, and treated her with a kind of admiration Linda hadn't seen in years. Each photo of them together felt like a knife to the chest. Every whispered conversation around town another reminder of what she had lost. Neighbors who once envied her stable marriage now looked at her with pity. The whispers stung worse than silence. as if everyone else had become a witness to her downfall. Linda had dedicated 3 decades of her life to Robert, believing her loyalty and sacrifices would be enough to sustain their bond. To see it cast aside so easily left her questioning everything she had ever done. Nights became sleepless, filled with racing thoughts and painful memories of the life she had built. Every glance at her wedding ring, every photograph in her home, mocked her reality. She was forced to live with the knowledge that Robert had not only betrayed her, but had replaced her, making her invisible in the very world she had helped him create. The humiliation only grew heavier as Linda faced the harsh reality of life in a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business. Gossip moved quickly, and soon whispers about Robert's second marriage reached every corner of the community. People who once respected Linda as a devoted wife now looked at her with pity, their sympathetic glances cutting deeper than words ever could. At the grocery store, she overheard fragments of conversation, her name spoken softly in hushed tones, always paired with Emily's. Friends who had once celebrated her long marriage now avoided eye contact, unsure of what to say. Robert did little to shield her from the humiliation. On the contrary, he appeared to thrive on flaunting his new relationship. He attended gatherings with Emily on his arm, their hands intertwined, their laughter loud enough for everyone to hear. Emily, confident and radiant, seemed to bask in the attention, enjoying the novelty of being Robert's new wife. Linda, meanwhile, was left in the shadows, her decades of sacrifice reduced to nothing more than a cautionary tale. The most painful moments came when Linda was forced to interact with family. Her children, caught between loyalty to their mother and obligation to their father, struggled to navigate the tension. They avoided choosing sides, but their silence wounded Linda deeply. She felt abandoned not only by Robert, but by the very family she had worked so hard to hold together. Each passing day left her with a growing sense of isolation, a reminder that the life she had built so carefully had been dismantled piece by piece. The dignity she once carried with quiet pride was gone, replaced with the sting of public shame. The breaking point for Linda came on an evening she would never forget. Robert had organized a family gathering, one that was meant to bring everyone together under the same roof. Linda attended reluctantly, still trying to hold on to some thread of dignity, but what awaited her was more than she could bear. As she entered the room, her eyes fell immediately on Robert and Emily. They sat side by side, close and comfortable, as if their marriage was the only one that mattered. Emily was dressed elegantly, her youth glowing under the lights, while Robert looked at her with a tenderness he no longer showed Linda. The air felt heavy with tension. Relatives and friends exchanged awkward glances, uncertain how to react to the presence of both wives in the same space. Linda could feel the eyes on her, some full of pity, others brimming with curiosity. She tried to remain composed, sitting quietly, but inside her chest her heart pounded with rage. Her children avoided her gaze, unable to hide their discomfort. For Linda, their silence cut deeper than words, confirming her fear that she was slowly being erased from their lives. As laughter erupted from Robert's side of the table, Linda felt invisible. Every gesture between Robert and Emily seemed exaggerated, as though they were performing for an audience, showing the world that they had moved on without her. It was a cruel display, and it left Linda humiliated in front of people she once considered her support system. That night, as she returned home, the weight of betrayal and humiliation boiled into something far darker. Grief had transformed into anger, and anger into a dangerous resolve. The cracks in her heart had widened into something unrepairable. Linda's anger did not fade after the family gathering. Instead, it deepened, curling into her thoughts like smoke that refused to clear. Each night, she replayed the humiliation in her mind. The whispers, the pitying glances, the sight of Robert holding Emily's hand as if decades of marriage meant nothing. The more she thought about it, the more unbearable it became. Her life, once full of meaning, now felt like an empty shell. She had sacrificed her youth, her ambitions, and her identity for Robert, only to be discarded for someone half her age. The pain hardened into something sharp, and slowly, the seed of revenge began to take root. Linda started watching Emily closely. She knew where Emily worked, how she moved, and what her daily patterns were. From a distance, She followed her through town, memorizing the moments when Emily was alone. Emily's routines were predictable, leaving the boutique in the evening, walking home along the same quiet streets. Linda told herself she wasn't planning anything at first, only observing. But her heart knew otherwise. Each step of surveillance fed the dark fantasy building in her mind. She began preparing quietly, rehearsing the idea of confrontation. The knife she chose was not random. It came from her own kitchen, a symbol of the life she had lived, of meals cooked for a man who no longer cared. She carried it in her bag as if testing herself, feeling both fear and an unsettling thrill. With each passing day, her thoughts grew more consumed. It was no longer about betrayal alone. It was about reclaiming dignity, silencing the laughter, and forcing Robert to understand the depth of her suffering. The plan was no longer a possibility. It was becoming a promise. Friday evening settled over the town with a calm that felt almost mocking. For most people, it was the start of a relaxing weekend. But for Linda, it was the night her anger reached its breaking point. She had spent days convincing herself this was the only way to end her humiliation, the only way to make Robert feel the weight of what he had done. Sitting in her car outside the boutique where Emily worked, her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, her breath uneven. The knife rested inside her handbag, its presence both terrifying and strangely reassuring. As the store lights dimmed, Emily emerged, locking the door behind her. She carried a small purse, her steps light and unhurried, unaware that danger lingered only a few feet away. Linda's heart pounded as she stepped out of her car. The street was quiet, the kind of silence that magnifies every sound. The click of Emily's heels, the rustle of leaves, the faint hum of a distant car engine. Linda moved quickly, her rage pushing her forward, drowning out the voice of reason that once might have stopped her. When Emily noticed her, it was already too late. In a sudden rush of fury, Linda lunged, pulling the knife from her bag. The attack was swift, fueled not by strategy, but by years of bottled pain and humiliation bursting free. Emily gasped, stumbling, her young life cut short in a matter of moments. The pavement darkened beneath her as the quiet street became the scene of horror. Linda stood frozen for a moment, her body trembling as the reality of what she had done began to seep in. Then, without looking back, she fled into the shadows, leaving behind a scene that would shock the entire town. The murder of Emily shook the town to its core. News spread quickly, and by the next morning, fear and disbelief hung in the air like a heavy cloud. People whispered in grocery aisles, workplaces, and coffee shops, stunned that such violence could happen in their quiet community. Emily had been young, vibrant, and newly married. Her sudden death felt not only tragic, but senseless. Police sealed off the crime scene, combing the pavement for clues. The sight of bloodstains on the quiet street left neighbors unsettled, many unable to sleep after realizing how close danger had been to their doorsteps. Investigators wasted no time piecing the case together. They quickly learned of Emily's complicated personal life and her connection to Robert, a man whose tangled relationships made him a prime suspect. But as detectives dug deeper, the focus shifted. Witnesses came forward claiming they had seen Linda's car parked near the boutique that night. Surveillance cameras from nearby shops confirmed the sighting, capturing blurry but recognizable images of her vehicle circling the area in the hours before the murder. The evidence began to build quietly but firmly. Forensic teams matched shoe prints near the scene to Linda's footwear, and fibers found on Emily's clothing were linked to materials from Linda's home. The more investigators uncovered, the clearer the picture became. Linda was not just connected to the crime. She was at the center of it. When police arrived at her doorstep, Linda remained eerily calm, her face drained of expression. But her silence spoke volumes. Neighbors watched in stunned disbelief as the woman they had once admired was led away in handcuffs. The story of betrayal had taken a deadly turn, and the town realized the truth was even darker than the rumors had ever suggested. The courtroom was packed when Linda's trial began, drawing in curious neighbors, reporters, and strangers who had followed the case with fascination. The story of a first wife killing the much younger second wife was the kind of tragedy that stirred both outrage and sympathy, and people wanted to see for themselves the woman at the center of it all. Linda sat quietly at the defense table, her face pale, her eyes hollow. The weight of her crime and the betrayal that had led to it seemed etched into every line of her expression. Prosecutors wasted no time painting her as a woman consumed by jealousy and rage. They presented evidence methodically, surveillance footage showing her car near the scene, forensic proof tying her to the attack, and the knife, traced back to her own kitchen set. Witnesses recalled seeing her watching Emily in the weeks before the murder, her presence unsettling and hard to ignore. The prosecution described her actions not as a moment of madness, but as a calculated plan, driven by humiliation and the refusal to let go of the past. The defense tried to tell a different story. They argued that Linda was not a cold-blooded killer, but a broken woman pushed beyond her limits. They spoke of the years she had given to Robert, the sacrifices she had made, and the public humiliation she endured as her husband paraded a younger wife in front of her. They insisted the murder was not premeditated but the result of unbearable emotional torment. But the jury was unmoved. The evidence was overwhelming, and the brutality of the crime left little room for doubt. After days of testimony and hours of deliberation, the verdict came: guilty of first-degree murder. The courtroom fell silent as Linda closed her eyes, the final remnants of hope slipping away. Linda's sentencing brought a grim conclusion to a case that had already left deep scars. The judge handed down life in prison, a punishment that echoed the finality of her actions. As she was led away in chains, Linda no longer resembled the proud wife and mother the town once knew. She was a shadow of herself, a woman who had allowed anger and humiliation to consume her until nothing remained but violence. Prison became her new reality, a cold world of routine and regret, where her memories of family life played like cruel reminders of what she had lost forever. Robert, though free from legal blame, faced his own downfall. The community that once respected him now viewed him with disdain. His reckless decisions had not only destroyed 2 women's lives, but had fractured his family beyond repair. His children, unable to forgive the chaos he brought into their lives, distanced themselves, leaving him isolated. The business he had built with Linda collapsed under the weight of scandal, and the man who once thrived on admiration was left with nothing but guilt and loneliness. For Emily's family, the pain was unrelenting. They mourned the young woman whose future had been stolen, a daughter and sister who had barely begun her adult life. Every milestone she would never reach became another reminder of the senseless cruelty that ended her story. The community, too, struggled to move on, haunted by the realization that betrayal and jealousy could ignite such tragedy in their quiet town. What began as the unraveling of a marriage had ended in bloodshed and despair. The story of Linda, Robert, and Emily became a chilling reminder that love twisted by betrayal can drive even the most ordinary person toward unthinkable acts of violence.